It was supposed to be just another night. My husband and I had spent years together, and like many couples, the routine had set in. I made dinner, we had a quiet evening, and we went to bed. But something felt different that night, something in the air that I couldn't quite put my finger on. We had always been open-minded about certain things, but never had we ventured into the territory we were about to explore. I remember him looking at me across the dinner table, his eyes not the loving ones I was used to, but something darker, more intent. He had always been the quiet one, reserved and patient, but tonight there was something in the way he spoke, the way his voice had that strange edge to it. It was almost like he was waiting for something, but I couldn't understand what. "I need you to do something for me," he said, breaking the silence. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I looked at him, trying to gauge his seriousness. I couldn't figure out whether it was a joke or if he was being serious. "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a tinge of unease crawl up my spine. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. "I want you to do something that will change everything for us." I raised an eyebrow, not sure if I was ready for whatever was coming next. But when he told me what he wanted, it felt like a shock to my system. He was asking me to do something I had never even considered before. And the worst part was, I could see that he wasn't just asking, I could see that he was demanding it. At first, I didn't know how to react. My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them good. "Are you serious?" I asked, trying to understand if this was some kind of twisted joke. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I am. And I want you to trust me." The request was shocking. My world, which had always been steady and predictable, suddenly felt unhinged. I tried to picture what he was asking, but the image was hazy, distorted by confusion and fear. "What exactly do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He leaned back, his eyes calculating, as if he had rehearsed this moment over and over again. "I want you to be with them. With 3 men. 3 black men, to be exact." His words hit me like a slap to the face. I felt the blood drain from my face, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But there was something in his eyes, something that told me he wasn't going to let this go. I froze. The silence between us was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. I wanted to scream, to tell him that this was insane, that there was no way I could do such a thing. But the way he looked at me, the intensity of his gaze, made it impossible to refuse. The air in the room grew thick with tension, and I realized that my life as I knew it was about to change forever. I was still trying to process his words, but it felt like my mind was spinning in circles. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. The room was suddenly suffocating, and I found myself looking around as if something in the environment could somehow provide an answer, a way out. But there was nothing. "Do you trust me?" he asked again, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, too calm. It didn't match the wild thoughts racing through my mind. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. "If you trust me, this won't be so hard." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My body was frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. His eyes were fixated on me, waiting for a response, and I knew I couldn't back out now. The thought of disappointing him, of letting him down, gnawed at me. I didn't know what had gotten into him, but he was determined. Without a word, he moved to the side table, where a small camera was set up, pointed at the couch where I sat. The sight of it made my stomach churn. It felt like a bad dream, one I couldn't wake up from. He had planned this, set this whole thing up, and now I was part of it. I wanted to scream, to run out the door, but the fear of what would happen if I did paralyzed me. He looked at the camera, then back at me. "We'll need to record it," he said, his voice almost detached, like this was just a normal request. "It'll be our way of remembering this moment." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the bile rising in my throat. "Remembering?" I repeated. My voice sounded foreign to me, thin and weak. He nodded. "Yes, remembering," he said softly, as though explaining something simple. "It's important to me that we capture everything. To see it all, to relive it." I stared at the camera, a sickening knot twisting in my stomach. The idea of being filmed, of having this moment preserved for eternity, made everything feel worse, as if I couldn't escape it even in my mind. But there was no turning back now. He motioned for me to stand up, and I did so mechanically, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. I felt like a puppet on strings, moved by his command, unable to break free from his hold. As I stood, he walked over to the door and opened it, revealing the 3 men he had brought into our home. I hadn't even noticed their presence before, maybe I hadn't wanted to. Now, they were in front of me, and I could feel their eyes on me, judging me, waiting. The first man stepped forward, tall and muscular, with a presence that filled the room. His gaze met mine, and for a moment, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it. But I couldn't look away. It was like something inside me had snapped, and I was suddenly aware of every small detail, the faint sound of footsteps on the floor, the way the camera lens gleamed in the dim light. My heart raced faster as they all gathered around me, their presence overwhelming. My husband moved behind me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. He whispered in my ear, "Don't be scared. Just do what they want, and everything will be fine." I wanted to protest, to run, to say anything that would make this stop, but the words wouldn't come. I felt paralyzed, trapped in a situation I didn't know how to get out of. And the camera was still there, recording every second, every movement. The man closest to me spoke for the first time, his voice low and commanding. "Are you ready?" he asked, his tone full of something I couldn't quite identify, expectation, maybe. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. My eyes flicked to the camera once more, the lens staring back at me, and for a moment, everything blurred together, my fear, my shame, the faces of the men around me, and the cold, unforgiving reality of the situation. "She's ready," my husband said, his voice steady, calm. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, motionless, as everything around me felt unreal. But I knew this was happening. I could feel the weight of it, the weight of their eyes on me, and there was no going back now. As the silence lingered in the air, I felt the reality of the situation press in on me from all sides. The camera was still there, its unblinking eye capturing everything, immortalizing this moment I never thought I'd find myself in. My body trembled slightly, but I couldn't bring myself to move, couldn't find the words to scream, to run, to fight back. It was as if time had slowed, every second stretching longer than the last. The first man stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against my arm, and for the briefest moment, I felt something stir within me, an unwilling, involuntary response. But before I could process it, my husband's voice broke through the haze of my thoughts. "Remember," he whispered, his breath hot in my ear, "just do what they want. Trust me." His words made my stomach turn, but I nodded. Whether out of fear or resignation, I wasn't sure. But I knew that the path ahead of me was no longer mine to choose. This was happening, and I could only follow, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and something deeper, more unsettling. The second man moved forward, his hand running along my back, sending a chill down my spine. I wanted to push him away, to scream, to do anything, but I was frozen, incapable of any action other than standing there, a silent participant in a nightmare. My husband watched, his eyes dark and unreadable, his face emotionless. He hadn't taken his gaze off me once. It was as if he was watching me, waiting for something, some shift in me, some sign that this was the right thing. But all I could do was stand there, barely breathing, unable to stop the unfolding nightmare. As the second man's touch lingered, I felt my mind begin to unravel. Was this really happening? Was this the reality I was now trapped in? My thoughts spun in dizzying circles, but no clarity came. All I knew was that the camera was still rolling, that everything I did, everything I felt, would be immortalized on film, in a way I couldn't undo. The third man, the one I hadn't yet acknowledged, stepped forward slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. His presence was imposing, and his words were soft, almost soothing. "It's okay," he murmured, as if that would calm the storm raging inside me. But nothing could calm it. Not his words, not my husband's gaze, not the camera capturing it all. And then, as the first touches were exchanged, as I became something I never imagined I would be, I realized something crucial. This wasn't about sex or desire. This was about control, about the slow, deliberate unraveling of everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, my life. In that moment, I understood that my husband wasn't just asking me to participate. He was pushing me into something darker, something more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. And now, with each passing second, there was no turning back. This was the moment that would change everything. but I couldn't decide if it was the end of something or just the beginning.